You're listening to Halfway There, stories from the path with God. Well, I'm your host. My name is Eric Nevins. Welcome to this episode of Halfway There. This is episode number 2. I'm very excited to bring it to you. Today, my guest is a gentleman by the name of Iain Bradbeer. Let me tell you how I met Iain. This is one of those things that I just consider the providence of God. I was actually meeting with another gentleman who I wanted to interview, who I was definitely hoping to get on. Still haven't interviewed, maybe someday. We were meeting at a Starbucks, and he said, "Oh, hey, there's one of my old pastors." And so he introduced me to this pastor, and then that man's name was Todd Johnson, and you're going to hear from him in a few weeks. But then they also introduced me to this guy named Iain, and Iain is from Australia, and he was in town to do some ministry. He teaches and has a prayer ministry. So that's really cool. So I felt like the experience was it was just one where I said, this seems like God's doing something here, and it would be really cool to share his story. And he was good enough to sit down with me. So, Iain, thank you very much. Here's what I think you're going to get out of the show. Iain asked this really amazing question. He says to God at some point, I don't want to live a life where I'm just having a revelation from you every 10 years. I want a life where you are the limitation. You'll hear him say that. And that just really impressed me about his heart for the Lord, who he believes the Lord is, and how he relates with the Lord. He's written a book. You'll hear us talk about that, and it's all kind of at the show notes. You can get that at my website, ericnevins.com. So that's enough for me. I think it's time that we hear from Iain. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen, Iain Bradbeer. Iain,
hey.
Thanks for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
It's fun.
This is exciting. It's been great just to talk with you a little bit here, and I'm excited to kind of share this and your journey with my audience.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. So we were talking a little bit, and tell you're here in the United States,
yeah.
And you're doing some ministry. So give us just a little bit of that, kind of what you're doing,
Sure.
What you do now, and then we'll go back and kind of come back.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, as a result of releasing the book about 10 months ago, we started following that up with traveling and teaching. So across a whole lot of denominations and movements, really. My background covers a fair bit of Christian territory, and so my passion really is believers and the journey of a believer with the Lord and the access that we have to him. So I'm traveling where I'm invited, and I get to go to a whole bunch of different countries and just sit with people, and there's some traditional kind of preaching, but there's a whole lot of getting to know people and unpacking what is this opportunity to experience fullness of life in Jesus, really.
Awesome. Well, that's cool. I want to, like I said, we're going to go back, and then we'll come back. We'll come back to here.
Yeah,
so
awesome.
Tell me about how you came to the Lord and what that was like.
Yeah. Well, I was in, I think, quite a common place, really, of being raised a believer. So I was always intrigued by people who had a really strong conversion experience, because I didn't have that.
Yeah.
I was raised in the household of, my dad's a Presbyterian minister. So my parents loved me. They loved God. They loved the Bible. I was raised in the middle of that. I loved it. I loved church. I didn't understand some things. There were some things that intrigued me. I couldn't quite understand why we talked about having a relationship with the Lord. And it was so vague and distant. That one always hung over me.
Yeah.
So I was absolutely convinced I was his, that he was good, that he was for us, that he was our rock, like there was a real security in it. But also just kind of an intellectual confusion of like, why was he so great then? Why is he so unavailable now?
Oh, I love that. I think that's similar to my experience.
Right.
I read the Bible and I go, listen, Peter did this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesus, I'm willing to put him in his own class, but Peter did this and Paul did this and James did that. And why not now?
Yeah.
Why not?
And I think the other thing that I had, I think because of the package of theology that I was raised in, which was basically a Scottish Presbyterian, derived thing. The answer that was there, which was subconscious but kind of known by everybody, was because of the fall. Like somehow the fall still influenced me. I was still kind of the evil-natured person struggling unto righteousness.
Right.
So the culture was, very much resigned to the idea that any shortcoming in the system was due to my sinfulness.
Yes, and that's a theological issue.
It's a theological idea, but the realities that it pushes on people, that was kind of a weight that I carried. Like, he was unavailable because of me.
Yeah.
Which is the opposite of the gospel that I believed. Like, if you'd asked my parents the gospel they'd taught me, it wasn't that one. But I think if you're kind of a conscientious, well-intentioned kid, which most believers are, it's very easy to blame yourself for the lack.
Right. How did you respond to that?
I didn't realize I had. Like, I didn't realize that it had affected me until probably much, much later, probably in my late 20s, when I really cried out to the Lord for some help with some stuff. Like, for example, I was running my own architecture practice by then, and I felt like I was sort of out at sea. Like, I didn't understand that commercial space. I didn't understand how to succeed in business, because I suppose my family culture was much more kind of humanitarian than business oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And God started teaching me, like, really quickly, broke me into a level of success, ability, I suppose, and success that was not what I thought I was worthy of.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, God led me, very clearly it was God, and it was a level of success that was not acceptable in my theology. And so my theology had to start breaking apart.
Okay, that's interesting. So tell me about that. So in your early years, before we go on there, is there, what did you do? Like, what was your relationship with God like during that period of time? And you kind of described that a little bit.
It was very much about giving yourself to people, like spending time with people, spending time with people who were broken. We were always kind of falling in love with families who had, I suppose, boulders that the river couldn't shift. Their children were sick, or someone in the marriage was dying, or, so there were these kind of situations where we gave ourselves as an opportunity for them to receive love, which was highly effective. Like, it was a very powerful thing that my parents did. But that was kind of it. And so we just did that until people died. There was a lot of sadness with it. There was a lot of unanswered questioning. Why did this happen? Why was life so hard for these people?
Yeah. Did you ever see yourself going into ministry?
I always wanted to. I always wanted to. So there was some drive, which I knew as a kid was just that I loved the Lord. Like, I just loved him. But I didn't know what to do about it. So the only model we had was, which, I mean, is so intriguing to me now, because I've spent so much time in America and the Christian culture here is so rich and diverse. But, in country town Australia, like, the only thing that I thought you could do was become a Presbyterian minister or a Bible translator. They were the two things that I knew were possible.
Right, so like a pastor or a missionary.
Yeah.
That's the same here. We do the same thing. Like, I went to seminary because I was enthusiastic in a small church.
Right.
In a small church, if you're enthusiastic, you're called,
Yeah, well, that was it. So, and I knew that I wasn't really the right fit for either of those. So, I didn't.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So you grew up, became an architect.
Yep.
You were successful.
Yeah.
And that challenged your theology a little bit.
Well, I think because what happened was we had a journey with chronic illness. Like, my wife, Claire, has had a chronic illness kind of situation for a couple of decades. And so that looked like it was going to be a serious threat to our ability to kind of even survive as a family. And so I really cried out to the Lord. Like, I just basically fell on my face and said, help me. I can't see how this is going to work. And then in response to that, then he opened me up to a level of success where it was absolutely clear that, the future was open to us and we were going to prosper.
Yeah. What was that moment like? Do you remember, was there a specific story about?
Well, it was shocking because it was a number of years of things opening up and, clients who just, I kind of walked into projects that other architects would kind of, compete for a couple of decades and hope that they'd be doing that level of work in their 50s, and I was doing it kind of 2 years into my private practice.
Yeah.
So it was really humbling. I had never experienced that success would humble a person, but I was really made very tender by that because I knew I didn't deserve it. I knew I hadn't qualified for it, but I could do it. I knew I could do it. And then I also experienced God as my provider, which, we'd always said.
Yeah.
And what I hadn't expected, my theology, I suppose, had always been that wealth was a risk to our salvation, like becoming rich would make you turn from the Lord.
Sure.
My experience of material success, because it was so directly related to my prayer life and because it was in that tender place where I was unable to succeed without him, I kind of fell in love with him. And I'd never been able to say that. I'd never felt that. I'd never kind of had this sense of, wow, I must be your kid and you must really care about me.
So you said, I think this is very interesting.
Yeah.
You said that sort of dawned on you over a period of years, right, as you were becoming more successful.
Yeah, yeah.
What I like about that is, as somebody who's interested in spiritual formation, we're only at one particular time, and so, you never quite know what part where you are, like when you're in it, it feels very tenuous and you're just not sure, unsettled maybe. And yet in hindsight, you can look back on it and go, that was a really, let's say those years were a moment, right? When God was sort of dawning on me in a certain way. And I think that's encouraging, hopefully, to other people. I know it's encouraging to me to go, that's, even if I'm in a hard spot right now,
something beautiful.
Perhaps God's doing something and I'm going to trust him to be doing something in the meantime.
I think what amazed me was that because I've been raised with the idea that we throw these prayers out, but they're not really answered. And what amazed me was that there would be a direct response that I could see in the natural. I'd never had that.
Sure, yeah.
And so I started to realize, wow, I'm walking towards him. I'm living into the discovery of him, and the gap between my prayer and the experience of him as a reality was kind of narrowing, which was really exciting.
Do you have any stories? Like, do you remember any particular moments where God maybe did that, where that gap got small and you may have...
I feel like the reality is probably I've got hundreds of them.
Sure.
It was really interesting because, for example, even with the, even when we were going on the journey with sickness, we had to move house because the doctors told us we should live in a cleaner. We were living kind of in the inner city, and they were saying you should move out where the air is a bit cleaner. And it was so interesting because there were 4 years there where we moved several times. I think we lived in 5 different houses, but for some particular reason, I had a fascination with the houses built by a particular architect, and they weren't very common. In fact, they're quite uncommon. But God managed to have us only live in houses by that architect every time we had to move.
Wow.
So even though this tremendous disruption was happening, and I remember actually now we're living in one, we returned home from 5 years in California and he arranged for us to live in another one. So, but the one time I drove into the street and I realized what was going to happen, I realized, there's going to be a house by those people here and this is to be our next home. And so it was extraordinary the way he did things like that, just to plot this kind of steady I'm here, my heartbeat is on this. There are elements of it that look like your family's being pushed beyond what you think you can cope with, but I'm writing a story here.
Yeah. I think those stories are interesting, and I think they're really important.
They're really important.
It's important to share.
Yeah,
because we talked a little bit about growing up.
Yeah,
I grew up in a church. We didn't share those things. I always kind of wondered, is God here and active?
Yeah.
And maybe people had stories. Maybe they don't. I don't know, because they didn't share them.
Yeah.
And I think it's so encouraging to my faith. I mean, it helps me to believe more when I hear stories like that.
Well, I think God, as an architect, we used to say God is not in the details, because Mies van der Rohe coined that phrase, and it's such an important one, like deeply private details and quirky details, and he is there to be seen and known in every situation. And I think it's really beautiful for us when we have permission to come alive like that, and safe friendships where we can share those treasures.
Yeah, good. So what happened next?
Well, the next piece was the healing piece. My firstborn son was about 4.5, and he wasn't very well. He had an intestinal kind of problem and couldn't eat very many foods. And I had a word from the Lord that he was going to heal him. And it was kind of crazy because it was the most kind of audibly I'd heard the Lord speak. I'm not from a background of hearing the Lord speak. It was considered superstitious and unsafe.
Right.
So we were trained to kind of only listen to the Lord as principle that we distilled through Bible study.
Right.
So I was on a journey of getting the hang of what does that mean, listening to the Lord? How do we do that? And all of a sudden he said to me, I'm a healer and I want to heal your family. So within 2 weeks of that, he'd healed my son. And it was quite a dramatic thing, because he went from being able to eat a very narrow range of foods to being able to eat anything. And he grew really fast for the next year.
Wow. So
he was at a point of not really growing and just not looking like a healthy kid. And he grew really, really fast, grew about 12 inches in a year. And that got me to a place where I basically sat down with the Lord and I said, all right, here's the deal. I've been living firstly behind a theology of suffering and poverty, then behind a theology of cessationism that says you don't heal anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ripped off. And I just cried. I really was so moved by it. I thought, God, I've got whatever I've got, 80 years or 90 years on this earth. I don't want to spend every 10 years living towards my next theological breakthrough, because all I'm discovering is the limitations of that set of ideas. And so I said, please, could you take me into a journey where you are the limitation? Like, if there's something there for my safety or protection, then limit me. But if not, show me who you are.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love that.
I was pretty fired up about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you say that in here. Or maybe we talked about it last time that we met, but something about, or maybe just now, something about just wanting more of God, right?
Yeah.
You get a taste, and then you want more.
Yeah, well, that's what I found compulsive. Everything he did and every kind of like a taste or a smell of him, I knew I wasn't having the full feast, but it was so compelling and so beautiful, and so I really felt like I just became possessed to discover him. Yeah. Driven by Holy Spirit, really.
Was there joy in it? I mean, was the joy attractive?
No. Okay. No, there was nothing kind of marketable about the journey at that point. It was very private, very, I think if people had watched us, they would have said, oh, they're going into the back country and, being concerned for the unsettledness of the journey. Yeah.
Interesting. I just wonder, because it's, sometimes that more theological, stodgy, it's not very joyful. And so, experiencing God, when you have those moments with him, my experience anyway, it's very and it's not necessarily bubbly, going crazy kind of joy, but it is this sort of settled, deep sense where you go, no, I know that that's God, and I'm really happy about
I've become a much more settled person. That was a few years later than what I've just described to you, but a couple of years after what I just talked about was when I discovered peace, which I didn't, I mean, I probably would have been hurt or offended if you told me I didn't have it.
Sure.
But when I discovered it and my mind stopped racing and anxiety left me, that's when I stepped into something. I was like, wow, this is, I'm being, my theology was always that I was born again because I was a believer, but it was like I was rebuilt, I realized the whole thing was getting rebooted, and I loved it. I was so thankful for it.
Yeah. So peace. Tell me about that. How did, was there a scripture or a particular moment?
I think I heard a teaching on the idea that we don't all have to agree. And I think I just asked the Lord, what was that about? What was the person trying to say? Like, was there something there for, that could come unlocked for me?
Yeah.
And it was pretty quick, like it was within a day or two. I mean, I also started praying in tongues a lot, which was something I hadn't understood, but I really...
Yeah, not really a Scottish Presbyterian
no, not
activity.
at all. No, and actually, in fact, some friends had prayed for me when I was about 21 that I would be activated in that gift, and I sat there like a log, thinking that the Lord would have to grab my mouth and, put it on remote control and make it happen. And then years later, I realized I'd actually had an experience where I woke up in the middle of the night, said some strange words and went back to sleep, and really wanted to say the strange words. And I looked back, it was really about 6 years after that, I remembered it and thought, oh, maybe that was it. Maybe I was so controlling of myself that the Lord had to get me when I was unconscious and let me actually come alive to it. And so then I grabbed that gift probably in my early 30s. And I just thought, this might be really cool. Like, if this is Holy Spirit, this might actually be the most effective way I can think of to pray. Like, if there's something I need to understand, if there's a way that the Lord wants to grow me, but I'm stubborn or stuck on it, or, have another idea that's wrong, this might be a way we could bypass it. So I started praying in tongues a lot.
Tell me about what that experience is like. I've never done that. So tell me what...
Yeah, well, it's really gentle. I think the thing that I didn't understand is you can stop it. Okay. It's just like a gentle river of sound that you can tap into, and you can just stop it. And so I didn't even believe it when I started doing it. I was like, God, I'm not even sure if this is real. And if it's not, please protect me from it.
Sure.
Because my background was so cautious.
Yeah.
But my experience was that it was very real, and I started having quite extreme things happen when I started praying for people, because I was on the prayer team at my church. And so all of a sudden, I started having visions of what was wrong with them. I started having compassion for people that I couldn't extinguish. Like, I would need to pray for people to cope with the compassion that was kind of burning in me. Yeah. And then had some quite stunning miracles happen very, very quickly, kind of directly connected to that season of pursuing tongues. So I kind of really liked it. I kind of went for it and stayed in that place for probably a year and a half.
Interesting. Did you ever have a time when you doubted God, or when you had, God seemed distant?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, that's what I love about my journey, is that when I was a kid, there was always that doubt, and I couldn't deal with it. I didn't want to even look at that space because it was so terrifying. So even though my spirit had this, I was in my spirit, or my inner man, or whatever language you want to put to that, I look back and I think, no, I was anchored to him since I was a kid. But intellectually, there's so many conversations in the world and in the air, like we just live in a climate where there are all those conversations, and I just wanted to blot them out. I didn't want to even look at them. So it was such a thrill for me when God started becoming real and delivering kind of real results in the world around me. That the thing in my heart of like, you're the rock of my existence, kind of was backed up by my experience. That felt like the happiest thing that had ever happened to me.
Yeah. Is it I'm going to ask this, and I can explain what I mean if you need me to, but is it a lack of faith?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the reason why we don't experience more of God? Or
I mean, I'm really big on, which you've discovered in the book, what I call the operating system of judgment, which includes kind of this idea of measurement, and it's kind of how humans exist outside of God. And so, with that operating system of judgment overlay, we take a scripture like, if you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you'd say to this mountain, be moved into the sea. And so a lot of us have a very deep kind of undermining going on about how much faith do we have, because we must have less than a mustard seed, because we haven't done any geology shifting lately. I think that's a real tragedy, because I think what Jesus is referring to is the scripture in Isaiah where the Lord's describing his passion to shift the cosmos from the season of judgment to the coming season of mercy, which is from the time of the resurrection till Judgment Day.
Sure.
And he says, this is like the waters of Noah to me, describing how his kindness is going to cover the whole earth. So there's this drivenness in the Father to move humanity into that season of mercy. And then the Lord goes on to say, the mountains will be cast into the sea, but my kindness will not depart from the earth. And so I think it's obvious to the rabbi of the day that Jesus is calling up that Old Testament prophecy and saying, if you really understood the heart of what's going on here, you would understand that I'm going to drive this project Earth, or this cosmos, into my era of mercy, where everything that stood in the way of me having fellowship with humankind is going to be gone.
Yeah.
And so it makes it much easier to then step into the opportunity that Jesus presents in John 17, like that we could come as friends, really, as adopted children, as the ones that were given to him.
Right.
And step into this opportunity to come alive to God without measuring how much faith do we need to have. Sure. And I think practically, sorry, this is just one of my favorite topics.
No, it's great. I love it.
Practically, if God can grow our trust, then we step into what I call a faith life. So I believe faith is the opportunity to come alive to God as he really is. So I think it's a changed state, and it's not one that we need to measure. So as we experience that he's a good Father that we can trust, we give over our history to him. Like we say, wow, who are you? I had no idea. Like, show me more, teach me more. Like, let me be more yours. Like, what else have you got for me to discover? Right. Our trust takes us into that journey. So we discover who he is and we say yes. We always give a more complete yes. Right. And so as we go on that journey, our wiring, like how we think, how we see, how we process, changes. And I think that's the faith journey.
Yeah.
Then you actually come alive to the reality of God the Father, which I think is what Jesus lived in.
Sure.
So people came to him with their hopes and disappointments. He was on an entirely different program because he knew what the Father was up to.
Yeah. See, I've been saying that for a little while. I think that really the Christian life is learning to see the world the way God sees it.
Yeah.
Not the way it appears to us.
Amen.
It appears a certain it appears a certain way. The rich get richer. The downtrodden have no hope or whatever. Right? There's all these things.
Yeah.
And then you read the beginning of Hebrews 11. Yeah. And it's like but there's faith. Yeah. There's faith, and I have a whole thing on that, but don't have to go into that right now. But yeah, I think when you go through all those people, right? It's like, well, they didn't get what they were after. Yeah. But they did those things because they saw what God was doing. Yeah. And they saw the world the way God saw it.
Well, and I think it's the genius of what God was offering us, like the woman wanted him to come and, share his divine nature with her. And he's like, I wasn't sent for the dogs. Yeah. And it's fascinating because Jesus, referring to a woman as a dog, provokes her to kind of this fiery faith where she grabs hold of it and says, yeah, but if I was a dog, I'd get some crumbs. It's this absolute conviction. I know who you are, and I know if I can grab one piece of what you are, then I've stepped into something of eternal value.
Right.
So despite the fact that he's using disgusting language, he's being completely offensive, he's absolutely being religiously obnoxious.
Right.
He knows how to precisely do what the Father had for him to do, so that woman who's probably got this fighty underdog, I'm not going to be the loser here.
Right.
I mean, he knew all that about her, and he knew exactly how to trigger her into grabbing the opportunity that was there.
Yeah, and he's amazed when she does.
And he loves it.
He's
loves
thrilled.
it. And it's precisely the same drive in the interaction with the rich ruler, which I go over in the book, where time and again Jesus is trying to trigger him back to, no, go for it. Like, you ran up to me like a fool saying, man of God, how do I get into this kingdom of heaven? And then you kind of slammed shut, locked down the hatches, and went back into your performance and how you'd qualified yourself. And so in that interaction, we see Jesus trying to trigger him back to that spiritual moment to grab who Jesus was, and he doesn't. And in that interaction, we see Jesus sad, and I think just watching the way he does that and why he so determinedly presents the Father's opportunity to come alive. It really brings us back to that invitation for us, imagine what the Father's got for me tomorrow. Like, imagine what God might do for you next week,
Right.
Let's go find it.
Yeah, fascinating. So tell me about your calling. So you've come to this place. If there's anything in between there that we need to cover, feel free to fill that in. But tell me about your...
I think there's a whole lot of kind of miracles and stuff started happening, and then one of my architecture clients said to me one day, Iain, the real thing I really would like is for my children to know they're loved. And it was such an interesting interaction, because I thought, wow, these projects take a couple of years, they cost a lot of money, and we're not dealing with the thing that half an hour of prayer would actually deal with. This threat against this family that they won't know love, that could be done away with half an hour with the Lord,
Yeah.
So that just pushed me almost beyond being able to just keep going as an architect. But I still wanted a word. I still wanted the Lord to say go, And so we were doing kind of nighttime prayers with my oldest son, who was probably 6 at the time, and he sat up in bed. I just remember it really clearly. He was lying in his bunk bed, and he sat up and he said, "Dad, I've got a destiny word for someone." And I was like, okay. And he said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel of the kingdom, starting in America and even going to Antarctica, and preach it to the penguins." And I was like, okay, that's a comprehensive go message from Holy Spirit. But right. I said, God, I just need to hear you say the word. Like, I need you to name the role, because I'm so trained in, I'm an architect, and I need you to tell me I'm going to become something different vocationally. And Grant, my son, was lying back down, and he sat up again almost immediately. So I'd said that to the Lord inside my own head. Grant sat up again and he said, "And it's called minister," which is, of course, the Presbyterian word for... So he nailed me, and I was like, wow. Yes, let's go,
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, it was really good. I needed it. I really needed him to say, no, this is not foolishness. This is me, and I'll take you, like I needed that.
Well, what's interesting too? I don't sense it from you any, you said you needed it, but I don't sense any shame in that.
No,
right?
I think
there's just God responded to what he knew I needed, like you were saying about the rich ruler and the woman. It's like he just did that, and there's no I shouldn't have needed that. It's just... Well, I always had
the thing of, like, I shouldn't need it. You should do it in faith. Right. Like, faith is actually doing things you don't think are going to work out.
Right.
Like, I had
and then if they do, you're excited.
Yeah, and so for me, the amazing thing was how God just did it. Like, he just did what was good.
Yeah.
And I just sat there feeling even a little bit foolish. Like, wow, you really are so able to just make yourself happen in our lives.
Yeah.
So so for me, that just pulled me more and more in.
Oh, awesome.
And I don't think we do very well when we think us being the hero
Yeah.
I just don't, that doesn't sit well with me. That's too much effort for the human.
Right. Well, that's what we end up having, right? We end up having a bunch of heroics, if you will, and not much God.
No, and I think we take a lot of risks with faith devoted kind of ideas, and I think people get really hurt. And I think the tender humility of actually being a kid kind of shatters our heroic narrative, but it actually puts him kind of slap bang in the middle of our history.
Yeah,
which is good.
So what'd you do?
So he ended up bringing us to America, and we went to a ministry school for a couple of years out in California, and then I got on staff there. And then that was interesting because I kind of thought I really knew that I was supposed to love the American church and what I call the American bride. Like, I feel like it's really important that America understands her righteousness, how much she matters to God, that she makes the other nations jealous for righteousness. So that was really deep in me. But then he really steered me towards writing this book and taking me back to Australia. And that was kind of practical. Like, my wife just really was alive to the idea that if she's close to family and, taken care of in that sense, then I can, jump on airplanes and fly around the world periodically, and she'll be all right. So
she's close to her.
Yeah, she's close to mum and dad and her sister and all that. So so it's great. It's been neat to see how the Lord cares for us as a family.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so let's talk about this just a little bit. We have just a couple minutes.
Yeah, sure.
That. So the book is called The Operating System of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's written by you and your wife.
Yeah.
Give us just a little bit of an overview. I know you've been talking about it throughout, but...
Yeah. Well, I really one day just came alive to John 17. I was reading it in my private time with the Lord, and it's easy to say I had a vision, basically a movie of the scene of Jesus praying to the Father opened up inside my mind's eye, and it was more dominant than my reading of the text. So I went into this kind of encounter with the text or Jesus praying that prayer, and I really came undone in a way. Emotionally, I was overwhelmed by the idea that Jesus would go in to this prayer space with the Father and do a deal. Like, I saw him making a deal with his Father, like, Dad, I've ticked all the boxes, I've done everything I needed to do, here's what I need you to do. And I really was aware by then how much Jesus only did the will of the Father. So it's kind of this circular prayer between the heart of Jesus for his disciples and the heart of the Father for the cosmos, in this kind of last moment before Jesus handed himself over to captivity. And so this scripture that I'd always thought was about, Christians agreeing with each other, we have to do unity. Yeah. All of a sudden, I'd studied the Bible long enough to realize the language wasn't the language of unity, it's the language of sexual intimacy or oneness. And so this really is a kind of it felt like an almost desperate cry from Jesus. Dad, I'm not asking that they come with me, but here's what I need to happen. Yeah. And so I realized that there was invitation to kind of a complete coming together of us and God that was beyond kind of an intellectual set of beliefs or theologies, but really was a practical living union of us and God.
Yeah, I read that you talk about Proverbs 3:5-6, which is everybody knows that passage. Yeah. It's very, we kind of throw it around. Yeah. So I thought this was really interesting. It's very similar to what you just said. Yeah. Talking about the word yada. Mm-hmm. In Hebrew, the word is used to describe sexual knowing, which we know is, very intimate and close. An intense and unmediated union, oneness. Yeah. You say because of translation, we've lost the fullness of its invitation to have an ultimate and personal union with the one who is without beginning and without end. Yeah. Yeah, love that. That's interesting to see it in that passage, right? Because it's very, for one, it's Old Testament. Yeah. We think of that as very New Testament as an idea. Yeah. And two, it's very just close. It's a I think you're right. I think that's the heartbeat of God, right? He really wants,
Yeah.
his whole point was to make a people. He
And
wanted
to
the
win
people
us back, like
Yeah.
to be with them, you know. He was
Yes.
kind of desperately disturbed by the Israelites' inability to be with him.
Right.
So he kept kind of rebrokering the opportunity to them.
Yeah.
You know, let's start again. Like, we'll do it again. And they never managed it, you know.
Right.
So I think the Old Testament, we see every kind of version of his heartbeat of trying to achieve that. And then in Jesus, the final triumph over the devil's ability to have us separated, you know. Not just that we would walk with God in a garden, but that we would walk with God in us as something that was unmistakably of him. So I think that is the New Testament opportunity.
Yeah, awesome. And it's always what God's been about.
Yeah.
Which
And it's
I think
really
is
interesting
important.
because I put new language to the opportunity, and I think a new kind of pastoral strength to getting people there. I think that's what I'm loving, is that, you know, you can go on YouTube and find out how to come alive to the Holy Spirit more, you know, but it's in this thing of like, let's tell our stories, let's share our stories, let's be people of the story, because he is the author of all of us. He's the author of life. And as we kind of journey with him, we come to have an affection for him and an affection for each other that kind of binds us into being the bride, you know. So I think it kind of unlocks the whole territory of the kingdom. But I love also that it is doctrine that goes way back in the church. Like a friend pointed out to me a couple of weeks ago that it's mainstream Catholic theology. Like that there's, you know, doctrine in Catholic theology that's been there for hundreds of years that says the marriage type union between a believer and Jesus must occur, you know.
Right. And that feels a little tense for an evangelical.
It's
sometimes
fascinating, except that, you know, when you put it to evangelicals, who I would prefer to consider myself an evangelical, except that, you know, God's journeyed me through some territory, but it is the clearest theology of the Bible. Like, it is what Jesus talks about. It's absolute obedience to the Lord. It's coming alive to the Lord so that we can move with him. And if you take out the judgment piece, like, I don't have to boast in becoming great at this. I don't use this to condemn anybody. We just hang John 17 there as our invitation. And in humility as children, we journey towards that possibility, knowing that only God the Father could make that happen for us. Only Jesus' death made that happen for me. We are called into kind of this tender union where God gets to be God, and we look like kids with a good dad. So I think it's a compelling opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. So the book is The Operating System of Jesus by Iain Bradbeer and Claire. I should say it that way, right? Iain and Claire.
Yes.
I'll get used to this.
Definitely
this
a
thing.
husband and wife.
Thank you. Thank you for spending some time with
you.
me. So if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, probably just Google me and you'll find me. It's iainbradbeer.com, or The Operating System of Jesus on Facebook, or there's a ministry website as well, but probably if you put my name in, it's the easiest way to find it.
Yeah, very good. I'll have a link to that in my show notes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Great to chat.
Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. That's our show. I hope you enjoyed just hearing Iain's heart for the Lord. I found his heart just to be really amazing and encouraging. If you want to get his book, go over to my website. It's ericnevins.com. You'll see the post for Iain and for this show, and you can click the link. I'll have a link there for you. You can get the book and read it. It really is worth checking out. So that would be wonderful. Iain, thanks a lot for joining me. I sure appreciate it. I just want to leave you with one quote. I got this quote. It goes out on my email. It's from Oswald Chambers. He says, "Never make a principle out of your experience. Let God be as original with other people as he is with you." Hey, your story is unique, and God's doing something. It doesn't matter where you are in that journey, at the beginning, in the middle, in the end, at a high place, at a low place, some place where things are challenging. Maybe it's a rocky place you're in. Just remember that God is with you, and He's going to see you through to the end. All right? Until next time, keep the faith.